community as a whole. And really a pleasure to have you here today and really exploring with Jon how all of you here might be able to utilize what you learned today to be a more effective leader, whether you're someone who leads meetings, leads a community, leads a team, leads an organization. Jon has a lot of wisdom to share today, and it's going to be a lot of fun learning from him because Jon teaches through experiences. So it's not just going to be sitting and listening, it's going to be something we'll all engage in. And I love learning from Jon. He's one of my favorite people to learn from. I've been learning from Jon around leadership for around 6 years now, and a lot of what he teaches through Appreciative Inquiry, which is the work he's going to speak about and the work that he really stewards, we utilize at Epic in our events. We teach to our clients, and it's really effective, and it's a game changer for really creating more cohesive and empowered culture. And Jon can speak more to that. But he had a little extra time. He was out here this week doing some work with Facebook, with Appreciative Inquiry, and he's flying out later and had some extra time. We're like, hey, let's get some people together. Let's create an experience that can help everybody expand in learning around how they can be a more effective leader. So thank you for being here, and I'm going to let Jon take it away from here. So welcome, Jon.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, you can.
Thanks, buddy.
Yes.
It was a really interesting week to be at Facebook. And maybe we end up talking about that or not. It's really good to be here. Before I start, I just want to be able to connect with everybody, so I might adjust this stool or... Is that a baby back there?
Oh. You actually have to hold her up. So
oh my gosh. Look at that baby! Oh man, this is going to be so good. That's so great. Okay, great. So first of all, thank you to, and I'm so embarrassed because we just met a minute ago and I've forgotten your name.
Jennifer, no worries.
I was going to guess that or Elizabeth.
Yes.
Jennifer, thank you for having us in your home.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, the energy in here is fantastic.
Thrilled you guys are doing your thing here. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And Ben and the Epic team and Robert. It's been fun to get to reconnect with you, Ben, and Robert. Seeing you guys connect is really cool. I admire what I've gotten to know about Epic Impact and the epic impact that Epic Impact is making in the world. So thanks for having us. Super cool. I thought that what we could do to start this today is I thought I could share for just a few minutes a little bit about what we do and why we do what we do, and then turn it right over to you. And I might present a question to you and have you explore that question for yourself. And then we might even have you connect with each other. And then we might bring out of the group your collective responses to that question. And then whatever comes out of your responses can then guide where we go from there. Does that sound okay? What else are you going to say? No. I'll take any other plan. So that felt right. So I'll just set a little bit of context around what drives myself and our team, and also just a couple simple introductions. This is the lovely Laura Mackman, if any of you have met Laura. Laura plays a key role for all of the events that we run. And when I say events, the work that we do is all about how do we unlock the collective intelligence or collective wisdom or collective capacity of different types of communities, groups, organizations, institutions. Sometimes it's an entire city. Sometimes it's a faith-based group. Sometimes it's a high-tech company or an automotive company. And Laura's role is helping to orchestrate a lot of the complex planning and organization that goes into those summits. So she can give you a lot of stories about crazy things that we're all a part of. Also wanted to honor, there's just a few folks here. In the back corner is Mike McCarthy. And Mike is, he was actually with us this week at Facebook. Mike and I have several ventures that we collaborate with together that are all related to leading different communities. Mike leads a men's community that we do together called Go Abundance. And Mike is also one of our lead facilitators. And then also Yoko and Rick, it's great to have you here. These are all my plants in the audience.
We were supposed to spread out.
Yeah. Next time. Yoko and Rick were at dinner with us last night, and whatever we said roped you in. So they were actually, I met them through a couple of communities of entrepreneurs that we lead, and they were at a retreat that we led last week in Austin, and are based here in just north of San Francisco. So, the question that guides everything that I and our organization, which the official name is FLI, we call it FLY, stands for Flourishing Leadership Institute. And there's one question that really guides everything that we do, which is wanting to discover what is it that brings out the best in any human system. And human system is kind of a nerdy way of talking about any group of people. Because it's easy to think, well, what works in a community versus a for-profit enterprise versus a faith-based group versus, is that there's differences. Sure, there certainly are, but we find there's some universal principles and universal strengths and conditions that in any human system can invite it to become its very best. And hopefully we can be very revealing of what does that mean, and maybe how do we do that. And my highest hope is that this Saturday morning that you have given up generates more than the time, which you'll never get back. So no pressure. So that's our big question. And I'm going to share with you 3 or 4 categories of where our work has brought us. And the reason I'm giving you this kind of menu of ingredients is because then I'm going to hand you a question to ask you, what is your highest reason for caring about this topic? And then we'll see where there's actually common themes, and that guides our next conversation. But the categories that our work have brought us into are, number 1, what we would call, and I'm giving you like the technical terms and I'll try and unpack it, what we would call whole system strategic changes. Whole system strategic changes. Now, I'm not a fan of labels, buzzwords, jargon, so let me try and call that what it is. What that is would be, and I'll just, the easiest way is through real examples. So, so this week we were invited into Facebook. And I literally have not had the time yet to prepare. How do I talk about this with the things that I can and can't talk about? So it ended at 5 p.m. yesterday. So forgive me as I filter, as I share it. So we were invited to Facebook because one of their imperatives as an organization, that this public knowledge, is over the last couple of years, there's a global dialogue around how is Facebook serving or not serving the well-being of I like to say humanity, right? They basically got humanity as a customer base. And so that's a big question. And we had an opportunity this week. What I can say about who was in this large group summit was about half the group were some of the leading researchers in the world from all around the world on mindfulness, psychology, the role of technology and psychology and how they play together. And the other half of the group were some of the leading programmers for Facebook. And what we were there to do was not a training or a speech. It was, I don't do speeches. This is actually very unconventional. In fact, when we lead 2 or 3 day large group summits and I'm facilitating, I'm probably talking less over 3 days than I will right now. Because it's usually we're presenting a question, orchestrating a conversation, orchestrating what emerges from that. And what we're often orchestrating through these whole system strategic change efforts is sometimes it's generating solutions to our highest challenges or highest opportunities. Sometimes it's 4 weeks ago, we were with a leading sustainable land management company called Clark out of Chicago. And Clark, they're in the mosquito control business, and they've been using our methodology for a number of years, and I'll talk about what that methodology is, and where they bring together their whole system. Like they literally put all 300 employees in the room. And when we do these whole system strategic change efforts, there's a number of principles that kind of govern what we're doing. one of those principles is the importance of wholeness, the importance of the whole ecosystem being a part of a dialogue, respecting the diversity and the relevance of as much radical inclusion as we can have. So Clark is an example. When they bring 300 people together for 2 or 3 days to do strategic planning, and we've done this with 300, 500, 1,000. We could do large summits with thousands of people. And I have dreams and visions of seeing stadiums of 100,000 people and co-creating shared visions. Because what's really crazy, a lot of what we do is guided by some just fundamentals of systems thinking, is people often wonder, like every year we bring together about 700 citizens from Cleveland to co-create sustainability initiatives for the future of the city. What's fascinating is to design and lead 700 people is there's far more in common than is different from leading 10 people through co-creating visions of the future. So once you understand just kind of geometry and choreography, it just becomes choreographing. How do we move large groups through creating visions? So it's fascinating stuff that we get to experience. It's about leadership, and we all have different definitions of leadership. We're completely interested in leadership defined as a collective capacity. And what is the collective capacity of any community or group to shape its own future? And I think if we look back in time, historically, there's a view of leadership, especially in the Western world, we idolize and we get excited about individuals as leaders. And I think it's not an either or, it's a both and. I think individuals who are in important roles, they're all important, but in roles of power, position, authority, or influence, have to be embodying certain types of awareness or principles. And I say have to, I should back that up. I would say whatever is resonating from those leaders has an impact on that collective system. And we can also, from a systems thinking perspective, start on the other side of it and say, well, what are the principles to inviting a system to be at its best? And then how can that teach us what individual leaders can embody to bring out the best in the human system? Is this of interest thus far? Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we do a whole system strategic change effort over 2 or 3 days, we're moving groups through a series of dialogues where, like, just to deconstruct it, because there's a lot of words here, but what we're really doing is designing questions that we give to a group, creating new configurations of conversations, inviting people from within a system that normally would be silos and separated to come together where there's no hierarchy. We flatten organizations in real time. There's no pre-negotiated agendas or speeches by leadership. You have CEOs sitting next to frontline workers, and everybody together is answering a series of questions, and I'll go through exactly what those questions are. And as they answer those questions, they'll move through a process that hopefully connects them to a shared sense of purpose, helps them to uncover their strengths, because the approach we use is a strength-based approach. And we have them uncover strengths by storytelling. So if a system came together and said, hey, we want to come up with a strategic vision for our organization. The first dialogue is we have everybody all at once talking about why is this important. And in just a few minutes, we can actually have one shared conversation and come up with one co-created purpose. And we find that's really important because if the system is generating its purpose, that has a depth of meaning that is very different than if a leader says, here's why this is all important. And that's something we're learning that the world, we think, is asking for. The world is asking for new methods and new approaches that are inviting innovation and insight from everybody, and no longer just from a small number of individuals. 100 years ago, in an industrial age, it made perfect sense. A few people should know how this factory runs, and then let's just find efficiency. But in changing environments, 2 weeks ago, we were working with the autonomous driving division of BMW in Munich. And we walk in, you don't know who has what title, because what they come to realize is, A, our competitive advantage is irrelevant. In a changing space, what we have to build is what they call evolutionary advantage. How do we learn how to keep evolving towards adapt towards a changing future? And the other thing that the other reason we're there working with them is, I can't remember what the other reason was. I can make it up. You don't know the difference. You don't know the difference. So when we're there working with them,
they don't need titles.
What's that?
You were saying they don't need titles.
They don't need titles, yeah. Yeah, so one of the principles of the work we do is about wholeness and equality of voice, which, by the way, the work we do is not fit for every organization. If leaders or owners of communities and groups aren't able to embody certain values, we're not going to probably even get in there, let alone our method won't work, because the values of certain individuals will undermine the collective effort. But back to, this is one solution we provide, whole system strategic change efforts, where we move through these dialogues, and it's strength-based. So if the company wants to come up with a strategic vision or a community, first conversation is almost always what we call a purpose conversation. And then the next one is, well, when have we been at our best? And they share stories, and then they unpack what led to those moments when we were at our best, and when are we at our best? These are critical questions. Because as they study moments of success, instead of studying what's not working, which there's a biological argument that says we find what's not working because that's what's kept us alive for a long time, right? So we can feel good about the fact that we get drawn into our problems and our fears, but what we're curious about is what happens if we shift the ratio. Instead of just looking for what's not working, and it's not about ignoring problems, it's about reframing how we approach them. So instead of asking what's not working, whatever the topic is, we can say, well, when have we been at our best? And we can study those moments. And then the next question the organization will ask is, what would an ideal future look like? And then we move groups through coming up with really creative representations of the future. And when I say creative, it's as creative as you can imagine. This is not left brain analytical visioning. It's people tapping into very creative collective spaces. They share those visions with each other. And then the next stage we go through is the whole community or the whole system will ask another question, which is, how might we actually bring those visions to life? And we uncover opportunity areas. And then we move into design thinking. And we'll turn rooms of 300, 500, 1,000 people into design studios. People get to self-organize. They get to choose what problems they want to solve or what opportunities to follow. And we move right into prototyping, just like IDEO or Nottingham Spurk or any leading tech company might do. And so we go beyond dialogue to designing. And then from there, we'll come up with deployment plans. How do we actually move these things into action? Is this making sense, this series of questions? So a whole system change effort is a series of dialogues. That's it. It's complex, yet it can be beautifully simple. Another innovation that we're working on is what we call it Convention 3.0. That's kind of our internal speak. But what it really is this. Think of how many organizations, communities, industries have large conventions where hundreds, if not thousands, or tens of thousands of people come together. And traditionally, historically, what we call Convention 1.0 is where you have teachers, experts, gurus, whatever we call them, that from one direction to another are sharing information. The irony is that kind of goes in the face of A, what we know about like experiential learning, and B, you can kind of step back and look at it and go, all these company meetings, all these industry conventions where we're still using models of teaching that, because we believe that teaching and learning teaching actually does not create learning. Learning happens through experience. And so these models of how conventions are run, company meetings, we believe there's a dramatic inefficiency because you have all this intelligence and wisdom and experience in the room, and yet we have 5% of that entire system or 1% speaking to the system. Why not turn them towards each other, turn them towards the future around some sort of high stakes, high priority opportunity? So last year, as an example, there's a global forum for business as an agent of world benefit, or business as a force for good, that happens every 3 to 4 years at Case Western Reserve University. And last year we brought this innovation to them, where instead of a traditional convention where it's a lot of plenary kind of speeches and then breakout speeches, we flipped it upside down, and only 30% of the speakers, and these are world leaders in systems thinking and consciousness and business for good, folks like Peter Senge or Frederick Laloux or some of the companies that are doing great things in the world, but we only spend about 30% of the time infusing the room with their wisdom. The other 60 to 70% of the time, the group is actually co-creating solutions for the future of the world. And you've got United Nations there working with leading executives of purpose-driven companies, working with students, working with researchers, working with refugees, working with multiple generations. So we believe that wholeness of a system is critical. And in these conventions where you have so much wisdom in the room, there's this huge opportunity to reinvent the entire convention concept. And we're doing it, and it's amazing what comes out of these. The third area where we're doing a lot of work, so you have whole system strategic planning, you have just this focus on conventions. The third one is what we would call enabling a community or group of people to redesign the conversations they have with each other. And we call that, so our method is called Appreciative Inquiry. And Appreciative Inquiry, you could deconstruct it, you could say it's a philosophy, and I'll break it down a little bit more for you in a few minutes. But Appreciative Inquiry is about searching for the best of what was, what is, or could be. And Appreciative Inquiry can not only be a method to lead a whole system through a transformation, but it also can be a philosophy that guides one-on-one conversations. And if you think about what's happening in any culture or organization, like people often ask us because we see a lot and we're facilitating a lot. People will ask, what is it that creates culture? And there's many answers. There's not one that I know of. But one answer that we have discovered is, one of the easiest ways to see the true culture of an organization is just listen to the conversations that people have with each other, or listen to the stories that people are telling each other. There's also a strong case that says culture will always follow structure. In other words, if the structures don't allow connection across silos, if structures don't allow collaboration, then no cultural effort will succeed without the right structure. So that's why we're big students of teachers like Gary Hamel. His great book on the future of management is all about how do we create structures and conversations that can accelerate strategic renewal, or invite innovation from everywhere, or invite people to voluntarily bring their best selves to work. Where Frederick Laloux and Reinventing Organizations, where he's asking all of us to ask the question, what are the new models of groups, and how can they, just by changing their structure, unlock more collective intelligence? So that's one of our solutions that that was the solution we brought to BMW 2 weeks ago. Was they came together and we had them redesign how they're talking to each other by changing the questions that guide all of their conversations, so that they can accelerate their ability to solve complex challenges in the face of a rapidly changing environment. All right, now is a good time for me to stop. Because I'm either causing confusion or curiosity, or hopefully both. And Ben, is this okay?
This is great. I think one thing to add is that the philosophy and the process of AI that John is speaking to is also really effective in working with individuals. And so, we use at Epic the framework a lot in our events to help people design for themselves, to design vision, to design where they need to be focusing their efforts for their own learning and their own mastery of their skill sets. So, there's this application that John's speaking to at the large level, but it's just as relevant and really effective at working with a group on their individual goals, desires, and growth trajectory as well. So I just want to make sure that's clear because it's extremely relevant at both ends of the spectrum.
Could I give an example of that?
Sure.
Can I share a story with you of something that happened this morning? So my buddy Mike and I went on a run. Is it okay if I literally share everything we talked about?
Yeah.
It's about I was going to say, I'm looking for a signal.
He's going to sneak out the room. But,
Open book. Hang on, let me record it.
Yeah, because this is about as personal as it could possibly get. So so this way I can zoom in all the way down to the conversation I'm having with a buddy on the run. And I naturally have not spoken this story before, so you get the first cut. So first of all, we start right here, and we make our way over to the park. We both have a deep love for nature. We both share in a belief that we can learn a lot from nature. Nature is a living system, and that if we look at I could go a different direction with the story.
Keep smiling.
I have 3 little kids, by the way, so if you're wondering, that doesn't bother me. If it bothers you, we believe that nature has powerful principles. In fact, a lot of our teachers at FLI are system scientists, where we spend as much time learning about what's happening in the trees and how does that affect what's happening in this room right now. It's fascinating stuff, fascinating stuff. So we immediately want to find nature. We had an hour to go jog and be. And as soon as we got into nature, because of our influence from Appreciative Inquiry, which Appreciative Inquiry, yes, it's about whole system change. It's about groups redesigning conversations. But thank you, Ben. It's also a philosophy, a way of living, about always thinking about searching for and seeing the best in our lives, which can apply in every single interaction we have. You know, like many of you are wearing glasses, I'm wearing contact lenses. One of our governing principles is that questions are just like a lens, as a metaphor. And the interesting thing is, think about this. The moment you put those glasses on, just like a question, not only can you not even see the lens anymore, but it changes how you see everything. Oftentimes our conversations are guided by unconscious lenses. That's why what we're trying to do is wake groups of people up to what are the conversations we're having by being conscious about the questions that are guiding those. So a question is like a lens that changes our future before the answers arrive. We take a lot of things very lightly, but the power of questions we think is profoundly deep. If 2 people or 1 person ask themselves a question, their future changes before the answers show up. It's that important to us. Questions are fateful. So at the beginning of our run, I said to Mike, what's important to both of us right now that we could have a dialogue around? And we both have a lot of things we could have talked about, but it was a sign when we both realized we both want to talk about a joint venture, which is, so Mike and I have a role leading a men's group of entrepreneurs called GoBundance. And there's a question that's come up within that community around, could we have an offshoot or another division for women? And Mike and I converged right at the outset. We want to talk about GoBundance for women. So the first thing we said is, well, let's question the question that we're asking. Because what we could have done is we could have said, what does the business model look like? We could have said, who should we be talking to? We could have said, where might this go? We could have asked a million strategic questions. And so we went back and forth with what's the right question to start with. And we landed on, why don't we start with the question, why is GoBundance for women important for the world? Why is it important for GoBundance? And then we kept questioning. And I said, wait a minute, Mike. Why don't we start inside ourselves? Why is this important for us? So we could get really clear on whatever it is within us that is going to refract out and have an impact on this whole thing. So that led to some fascinating conversation. So we asked ourselves, why is this important for us? And that led to Mike and I both reflecting on, Mike has a daughter, Ember, who's 4, 5, Mike? 5. I have a daughter, Sierra. I have 2 boys. Mike's got an older boy. I've got 2 boys and a daughter, Sierra, named after the Sierra Nevadas. My wife and I got married in Yosemite there. And so we realized, we thought, this is important for us because we started to think about our own daughters and what kind of world might they grow up in. And then we started riffing on why is this an important conversation? And it got deeper and it got more personal. And I had shared with Mike, I said, what's interesting is I'm going to see my mother later today. My mother was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I just came right out and said, Mike, I didn't have a good relationship with my mother growing up. It wasn't healthy. I would argue it's still not healthy. And then I said, of all the relationships I have, I think I've got a pretty good relationship with my daughter. Of course, anyone who says, I think I've got a pretty good relationship means it might not be great, right? And then, I consider myself a really good dad by all of my own parameters. And I said, but the truth is, my relationship with my wife is one that probably needs more work than any other relationship in my life. Mm. And I said, so when I think about these 3 generations of women that are all in my life today. My daughter, my wife, and my mother. These are the 3 women that mean the most to me. And so as we reflected on why does this Go Abundance for Women thing, why is it important to us? By the way, this is the first question. Doesn't matter if it's Facebook, BMW, any institution we've been with, it's the first question we always start with for the whole system. Why is this important? And we ask that question at every level. Why is it important for the world? Why is it important for your organization? And why is it important for you individually? Because it's not until we're willing to explore purpose at all levels that we really unlock kind of the deepest, most powerful answers. So Mike and I were reflecting on, wow. And then Mike said, my marriage probably could use some work too. And so all of a sudden we realized that, this purpose for this Go Abundance for Women, we realized that what's drawing us towards it is our own need for healing, is our own need to make ourselves complete. And I've had mentors tell me that everything we do in life is ultimately to heal some part of our own soul. And so at that point we thought, oh shit, this is a good conversation to have. And then we said, what's the next question to ask? And so the next question we asked was, well, if we're going to, if we're going to have a complete conversation about this possible group of women that we might want to serve or lead or help them grow or start, we need to frame the conversation. Because one of the things that we find very important is it doesn't matter if it's one-on-one or a group of any size, the first question is fateful. And if you look at system science, there's a snowball effect. That the earliest questions we ask will affect everything else. So Mike and I asked ourselves the question, okay, what is the task, right? And it could have been superficial. The task is we're going to grow this new business division. And we went back and forth, and we kept throwing back and forth how might we questions. And we finally arrived at a how might we that was, how might we bring the best of what we have each learned about healthy, growing, and emergent communities, and combine that with what the world might be asking for on behalf of women and the whole world. So we got to that question. How might we combine the best of what we've learned about healthy, growing communities and what we believe the world might be asking for, or what the future might be asking for as it relates to women in the world? We thought, okay, let's go with that. And then we went to the next question. There's 5 questions that guide whole systems and jogging conversations. They're the same 5. It's a derivative of these 5 that guide everything. So it's always starting with, why is this important? And then it's, well, what's the actual task here, right? What's the actual collective conversation we're going to have? Let's frame that. And after we created that, and an interesting thing about that frame we chose is Mike and I had a dialogue. We said, well, should the frame be, how might we bring the best of what we've learned about communities and combine it with what the world is asking for so that it might enable Go Abundance for Women to thrive? And Mike and I realized, we said, we need to actually not be attached to it even being called Go Abundance for Women. We actually need to not even be attached to us being a part of it. We need to see what's the most important wisdom that we bring together, and who will we bring together? Because we're going to host some sort of summit with women where we're going to move them through our process where they co-create the possible answers to this. And we realize we have to be so open that we'll let go of even the name of it, which it's so easy for that to be the thing that everyone would think, well, no, that's it. Obviously it's going to be called this. Because if we're not that open as the primary first questioners, then we ourselves are constraining what could possibly emerge. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. So here was the next question we asked. And this is so simple. We're just following our framework, right? The next question we ask is, Mike, let's each share a story with each other about a time where we've seen a community emerge at its best, at its healthiest. And then let's deconstruct what happened. So I shared a story first. I shared a story about a community called the Quantum Leap Mastermind. Chiyoko and Rick are part of that. They were there last week. And last week, my perspective, and I think a lot of the folks there, thought it was a pretty powerful experience. And even though it's a community that's been around 3 or 4 years, it was kind of revived in the last year. Because a year ago, I was actually questioning, should we even continue this, for rational reasons. And And we decided to keep it going. And last week was a representation of a very healthy emergent community. And so Mike and I asked, why was it healthy, right? So we can deconstruct when we've seen something at its best as it relates to the task, and then apply that to this task. And my answer was, well, it was healthy because a few reasons. Number one is because the event where we invited people to come into this community, which happened last November, a large event with 400 or 500 people we do every year in San Diego. That event, I showed up in a place where what I was valuing and what I was embodying, it seemed to invite a very diverse group of folks. And it not only invited a diverse group of folks, more diversity than we've ever had at any meeting that we've had, but it also invited folks to show up in a way with realizing this is the single question everybody's asking every time they walk into a group, our opinion is. Everybody's asking this one question: can I be myself and at the same time fit in? That's what everyone is consciously or unconsciously asking. Can I be my true self? Can I run this meeting barefoot and fit in with this group, right? That's what everybody is asking. And what was cool is, so part of why this community last week was so healthy, I think, is because, and we're really inspired by some of the teachers at MIT, Otto Scharmer, who developed something called, he and his colleagues, Theory U, which it guides a lot of our beliefs around what allows a human system to shape its future. And his framework is deeply complex, yet powerfully simple. And the powerfully simple one-sentence explanation of his framework is that as individuals and communities, if we can go through one simple journey, amazing things can happen. And that journey starts with being willing to open our minds, literally as the leader or the convener. When I walk into a room or one conversation, how open am I? How open am I? And there's a lot of research that shows that we're kind of up against a battle where the more power or authority people have, there's a correlation that says they become less open. So we almost have to figure out how to flip that, where how can I be more open? How can I be as interested in being influenced as I am in influencing? And so first step is we have to open ourselves to be willing to see the world outside of the way we're conditioned to see it. The next step is, can I open my heart? Which is, can I now see the world through the eyes of others? It's one thing to just open up my own perspective, but now can I see it through your eyes? And when we can develop that empathy, that moves us toward this final place called presence, or presencing, where from that place, I can connect to the future that might be seeking to emerge. And when I can get that present to the future that's seeking to emerge, we can now go up the other side of the U, which is where we start to crystallize visions of the future and prototype and bring them into reality. So why was that community healthy? Because I was studying so much of Otto Scharmer's work. I showed up to the event that attracted them, very open. And I think that was reflected through who showed up, is that openness, that openness. And then Mike shared a story. Mike is an owner of a Keller Williams region, and he has 7,000 to 8,000 agents in that region. And he shared a story about early in his career, how early on with Keller Williams, how one of the things that he saw was that as they were kind of figuring out their business model, they were able to generate a co-created shared purpose. They were able to generate a sense of shared purpose that other real estate agencies weren't able to generate. Right? And how do you do that, by the way, generate shared purpose? It's as easy as asking everybody, why is this important to you? Having them share with each other and then finding what's common, what connects their answers, right? And it's not that the leaders can't have their own answer, but they can bring those with everybody's answer and see where we all end up. So Mike and I extracted, when have we seen emergent communities at their best? And then we asked, what were the strengths, the universal strengths that even from those stories would apply to maybe this GoBundance for Women? So we thought, okay, let's honor those and see how do we bring that into whatever we create. And then the next conversation Mike and I had, it was the final conversation, was if we imagine waking up 5 years from now, and this thing, GoBundance for Women or whatever it's called, was making an impact in the world beyond what we ever could have hoped for, what are we seeing? And that got us to the steps. So we shared our answer and then we walked inside. And Mike shared with me, he said, you know, what I'm seeing is, he said, selfishly, this probably helps, you know, me heal some of my most important relationships. He said, but what I'm also seeing is a future where this women's group of entrepreneurs, what they have created is so powerful that it is actually has been joined together and is lifting up the men's group. Right? Because he and I don't mind admitting that right now, we think a lot of the reason those men love to get together, it's a very respectful group, but we think that it's the same reasons we feel comfortable in that space is because without women in the room, we can forget that we may have had mommy issues, right? We wonder how many other men in that room love being there just because they can ignore any challenges they're having. And at our last retreat, it actually came out in the open. In fact, it emerged as the theme in the group. And these men almost universally have a very high net worth. And yet there was a point during the retreat where there was an acknowledgement that came into the room that the thing they all needed the most help with was their personal relationships. So Mike shared a vision of where one day this women's group could be so powerful it actually helps the men to open up, and together they're creating even more. And then I shared, I said, maybe what's happening, and it was similar. I said, maybe what happens is whatever this women's group creates brings together all of the feminine strengths of empathy and inclusion and nurturing that combined with whatever the masculine strengths are, can end up being a reflection that could solve some of the biggest challenges in our world. What if that's happening? And then we walked inside. But that was our conversation. And so it was a one-to-one conversation guided by 3 or 4 questions. And we could have had a very superficial conversation during the run. We could have talked about a lot of other things. But by being conscious, what are the first questions we're asking? It leads to maybe something more meaningful. So I'd like to pause and ask what's moving in the room, or what is your curiosity or your energy, because I abandoned the plan that I created when I got up here. But we didn't have a firm contract on that. I would just like to open up to curiosity, and there is no off-limits direction. I've said enough to stir something. And maybe one way to do this is if either of you want to lead with questions, we can also listen to collective curiosity, and I can respond to collective curiosity.
So the question that you wanted to bring, I think, is still relevant. If you want to ask.
Wait, do you have a pen handy or something to write on? And you can do this without a pen. You don't need it. For some people, it helps. So the question is, by the way, I'll see my mother in about 4 hours. And that's going to mean a lot. Oh, there was a part of my story with Mike that I just forgot about. So I actually had a dream last night. I won't call it a nightmare, but a bad dream. I had a bad dream last night, and this is some real shit. I had a bad dream about 2 women who are in one of our mastermind communities. And the dream was that I was actually sitting next to Laura, and we were in the back of one of our retreats. And there was one woman in front of us named Deb Jolson. These are people in the community. And there was a woman at the front named Jan Stanley. And Jan was presenting to the room her concept for her book. Actually, we had the book in our hands. And in the dream, I was sitting in the back. Deb was in front of me and the whole group, and Jan was on the stage. And I was looking through Jan's book, and I said something out loud. And I can remember in the dream that what I said out loud, I immediately thought I was justified and I could rationalize saying it. And it was something like, this is a bad idea, or there's something about her book that she hasn't thought through. And in the dream, as soon as I said that, Deb, who's friends with Jan, Deb's sitting in front of me, Jan's on the stage, Deb turns around to me, and in the dream there wasn't a conversation, but what happened is my relationship with Deb and Jan disappeared. And when I woke up, I thought, what does that mean? And I thought, wait a minute. This last week at Facebook, I had my own conflicts with women on our team. And the conflicts I had were because I would say something or do something that I would rationalize as okay, but not respect that it really wasn't okay. So that made our conversation very real, very quickly. Is that weird to hear me say that?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's amazing when we ask certain questions, the things that we become clear on, right? Please.
John, can I ask a question? First of all, congratulations for what you do is fantastic.
Thank you. And do you mind sharing your name, please?
I'm Jason.
Hi, Jason.
I'm a student of life.
Yeah. I think we all are.
And getting invited to Facebook to do what you do, it's really amazing. Would you mind sharing with us some of the questions you asked in the summit? So that we could learn more.
Absolutely. Is it okay if I follow this?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Why don't we do this? Let's hold that question, and I will honor it either with the group or with you privately in a few minutes. Yeah.
Can we ask a question to him, to everybody? That
Yes.
is one of the questions that was asked.
Yes. Sorry, sometimes I can fall off track all the time. So I'm going to give you a question as a group, which is, it's what we call a purpose question. Oh, this pen's really thick.
They're all thick.
They're all, you don't need it. Why is it, and you can just reflect or write it down, why is it that enabling change at the scale of a community or a whole system, whatever that means for you, a region, a company, an institution, your family, why is it that enabling positive change at the scale of any system, why is it important to you personally? And let's just leave it at that. Why is this important to you? And I'd love for you to take 20 seconds, and you can either reflect or just jot down a couple notes, because in about 30 seconds, we'll have you turn to two others and share your answers. So why is this important to you? Why is this topic, any aspect of what we've talked about today, right? Why is this important to you? Why is it meaningful for you? Enabling a positive change in any community, any human system, any group, any institution, of any type or kind. Why is this important? I'll give you a moment here just to jot down anything that comes up for you. They might be able to do that. All right, whatever you're writing, you don't mind wrapping it up. Sorry for interrupting your thoughts there. Here's what I'd like to invite you to do. You could just stay seated. You're going to have to turn in different ways. I'd like to invite you to get into a conversation of three. And if it's needed somewhere, it could be four. We're going to give you about just 6 or 7 minutes, and in threes. By the way, if you're here with somebody you know, it's not a bad idea to not have them in your group of three, okay? Because it can just enable a diversity of the conversation. That's not a universal truth. But in groups of three, share your answers with each other. And then once you're done sharing, you can then reflect on your answers and ask, was there anything interesting or inspiring or maybe in common, a connection point or a theme amongst your answers? Please, make some friends. Welcome to move around. Come over. You can move all around. May I please invite, let me hear from a few of you to share. I'd love to hear from anyone who could share. Was there anything inspiring or in common amongst your discussions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Justin. I work with Epic Impact. Hey, Justin. And we had a few things that were kind of shared. One was remembering, and this is really for Yoko, remembering the purpose of institutions and systems in the first place. And so that this idea that there were a lot of systems and institutions created for this like really positive, exciting reason, and we've gotten away from some of that. And both between her and Ro, there was a lot share about evolution, and like we've evolved so much in technology, but not so much in our relationships. And bringing that to the forefront, and we all just felt really strongly about bringing more love through this process.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's really cool. Yeah.
So my name's Eric. One of the threads that was coming across ours was just how beautiful like systems goes across so many different things, from Carol bringing in the military to finance to anything in between. And more importantly, you brought up earlier the questions of can I be myself and do I fit in? And we thought how interesting that is. If we don't feel that, how are we able to participate individually within the system? And really, it almost starts at what you're able to ask yourself on an individual level. And the example being like you brought up the relationship to women. That's something I've been exploring. And this idea of all these people competing in this narrative of the marketplace so that they fit in, yet many of them may be avoiding this feeling. And it creates this system, which we just found like really interesting how all that was tied together.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Eric.
Yeah, cool.
Yes, next, please.
So on a very simplistic level, obviously, positive, change is going to have more likelihood of leading towards success or meeting your goal. The corollary of negative change almost always ends in disaster. But what I really appreciate by this group was the whole thing that change is going to happen. And are you going to look for the fields that are positive, or are you going to look for the fields that are negative? And that leads to our natural behavior as human beings to criticize, to be brought in to be that added value. And I can't tell you how often I'm a VC. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get to a no as quickly as possible. Many of you don't know that, but that's our business. And so basically we tend to justify that no, which comes across as a criticism. For me personally, any company I'm coaching, I'm telling them this is the biggest gift you could be getting, because you're getting something you can do a nice little move with and just push it back out in a very positive way. But that's not the way a lot of people look at it. So we still have, coming back to that theme, change is coming. It's how are we going to work with that positive change, and how we're going to work with a negative change or the negative influences that happen in our systems. And how are we going to ensure that we really are embracing every change in a positive way.
So, and we also kind of got it in how, when we embrace that positive change, it helps us and others to be our best selves.
That's great. Thank you.
That's cool. Anyone else like to share? Yeah, Greg, please.
You guys mind if I try to
Please
summarize? Okay, so the question about the system, it was very interesting for me, or what I found really cool about it was we were all focused on the advantages of the positive approach to it, right? So Jon said things like healthy and happy, and Natalie had inclusive and shared and belonging. And mine was more on the energetic vibration level, and kind of all wraps in together, because as we change our vibration level through positive comments, we get people gravitating towards that, and we open up and can believe anything's possible.
Awesome. Anybody else like to share?
So, well, we're look at my notes here, sorry.
So we were talking about how we're naturally inclined to not change, because if you, as human beings, if you looked at everything as unfamiliar all the time and didn't have a certain amount of identity and self and habits that you do, you just get lost, you lose your mind. But the flip side is that if we don't adapt, we die. And so how do we continue to find what is important to change without both losing our identity, but also without getting stuck in our identity, without getting stuck in our titles or our roles or our, you're a dad and, you know, you're a speaker, and you know, we all have these things that make us feel good, but that those are fixed. So what's the mechanism by which change is healthy and helps us grow and not be stuck, and yet not get so caught up in the tumult of change?
That's beautiful. That's great. I'd love to respond to a couple of things that were just shared, and this will be brief, and I promise that. And then I just want to hear questions that we can answer. A couple of things that were just shared. What was your name, please?
Jennifer. Oh, Brenda.
Brenda.
Yes.
Brenda, one of the things that you just shared is that how if we embrace positive change at a system level, it can also bring out the best in us as individuals. I'm rephrasing what you said. In fact, what I heard might not at all be what you said. But was it something like that?
Yeah, as individuals and as an organization.
Yeah. So one of the things that we are seeing, which is really, really, we consider it to be exciting, is I think a lot of folks, so I grew up, my entrepreneurial start was as a Cutco rep. And as a young Cutco rep, I was introduced to the concept of personal empowerment. And the idea that if I become the best version of myself, then I can create the best organization or contribute in some way. And then maybe there's this sensible sequence that says, I become my best version, now I can make an impact, and now I can change the world. And what I'm acknowledging here is there's I think there's often this idea, and this happens even in corporations, where we get really fixated on, okay, we've got to engage our employees. We've got to generate well-being for our employees. We have to nurture them, because if we nurture them, if they can honor their best selves, then that will lead to maybe us as an organization thriving and maybe even changing the world in some positive way. One of the discoveries that we've made, and when I say we've made this, it's an observation, is because everything we do is at the scale of the system, the large majority of it, what we get to see is what happens when an entire group gets connected to a purpose or an aspiration that's transcendent, bigger than just their organization. How are we not just supporting our bottom line, but even social issues, or ecological issues, environmental issues? And one of the things that we notice, and we could name organization after organization, but if you're familiar with many of them, some of them you wouldn't even believe the industries they're in. Here's one, a company called Vigor. Vigor is a shipbuilding yard. They've got a couple thousand employees. They're up in Alaska. And as soon as I say shipbuilding yard, you can create images of who's working there, what kind of culture might they have. And yes, it's predominantly men. And yes, it's probably a very masculine environment. However, when Vigor, when their CEO and their leadership were attending our global forum last year, they came there. And one of their several questions was, how can we learn from feminine energy to bring into our organization? And one of the things I learned about them, having dinner with them one day, is that their purpose as an organization, it's not to build ships. Their purpose is to create a space where their employees become the best versions of themselves. And the CEO shows me a video on his phone. He said, this is one of our shipbuilders leading a lunchtime meditation. And I'm watching this shipbuilder leading breathing exercises. And the CEO proceeds to tell me that the gentleman leading the breathing exercises had been rehabilitated after coming out of prison. And what we see in these organizations is that, yes, there is a sensible sequence that says, let's help people be their best, and then maybe we'll change the world. We also see that if you think of it from a systems perspective, maybe it's not linear, maybe it's a loop. What we see is that when organizations come together around some huge purpose around changing the world, that actually in turn causes people to want to be their best. And in fact, I could tell you another company, a mining company, they're being purchased right now, it's in the news, and We do large summits for them. They've done a summit every 3 years, going back a handful of years. Fairmont Central. In Fairmont Central, they're a mining company. So we could have a whole debate: are they ruining the planet? Well, they were a handful of years ago awarded as a leading corporate citizen, because one of their missions is to figure out how to serve the planet socially, how to serve the environment. Many of their operations are not only carbon neutral, but regenerative now. When they come together with 600-700 employees for 3 days of planning, one of the days they get outside the room and they go plant trees. They're an amazing organization. And one of the things we've learned working with them is they have yoga and planting trees and helping people eat healthy, but the thing that causes people to come alive the most is not the focus on the individual. It's the collective focus on a grand purpose that causes people to, and there's arguably a neurological basis for this. Like my 8-year-old, when he watches a kung fu movie, he wants to do kung fu. There's something in the brain called the mirror neuron, right? This also explains emotional contagion, right? And the neurological basis for this is when a whole group of people is looking at this really net positive outcome they want to make in the world, especially net positive outcomes, not just artificial, we're doing good work, but they really actually believe they're making a net positive. It causes them to want to see themselves in the most positive way, being the best version of themselves. So it's an interesting reversal of how we often think about, let's help people, and then they'll help their organization or their business, they'll help the world. We see it actually works the other way around too. It's not an either or. Mike?
I was just going to say, it's also a good example of sort of like a positive peer pressure. So like if you go into a company like that and it's cool to care about the world and yourself and to eat right, and that's the place you're thrust into, where now you have to behave that way to fit in, all of a sudden you're positively being pressured into things that are good for you, and you can instantly make that shift if it requires you to be that way to have connection. And I think that's such a great part of that idea.
And what you just gave a beautifully clear explanation to, there's one of our great teachers is Dana Zohar, who written many books on spiritual intelligence, spiritual capital, and she's really a systems scientist. She's out of Europe, and one of the things that she talks about is how do you shift a system? A lot of what she teaches is you study the 12 governing principles of like nature as an example, as a complex adaptive system, and you can actually see how that applies to people. And one really practical example is what you just shared, Mike, which is, says there's 2 ways for a system to evolve. One of them, and Nick, I think, kind of pointed to this, or somebody else pointed to this. One of them is through chaos or problems, right? One way to evolve is the world says no, or we have some sort of problem, and we can either evolve upward or break down, right? Unfortunately, that's how a lot of, leading turnaround efforts, it's really just, something happened too late. It's a lot of evolution happens in the face of adversity and problem, and maybe it'll always need to be that way. Maybe we need enough collective pain or something. I don't know. What Dana Zohar suggests is, what if we can evolve positively without having to do it in the face of great adversity? And one of the several ways to do that is literally through realizing that in a group of people, let's say we're a team that works together, we're all driven by different motivations. And some of us might be coming from a place of fear or anxiety. Some of us might be or self-centered or egocentric motive. And maybe we all are everywhere on this scale at different times. And then some of us might be motivated by more otherly motivations that eventually extend outward towards the whole planet. One thing she says is it's literally a math equation. That if it's a scale, and not both sides of the scale, or you can be kind of near the middle, and you can be really high up here and really low down here in terms of what's motivating me right now. And the scale was developed by Ian Marshall. Spiritual Capital is the book that teaches this really well. But she has a very profoundly simple observation, which is what you just shared, which is in a group of people, if a critical mass are motivated by these higher motivations, it can move people up from the bottom. But what she suggests, I don't have some proof that this is true, is that if the critical mass is below the equator, it's very difficult to move above it. There have to be some powerful forces, one of them being who's most influential with that group, and there have to be the kinds of practices or behaviors that can hopefully get them to shift their motivations. It's interesting stuff. My last comment to Rick, something you said about people gravitate towards positive conversations. You know, if you look at the trees outside, they all grow towards what? The sun, right? And that's called the heliotropic effect. And we see this everywhere we go. We walk into organizations, and let's all be real, many of you are consultants. First of all, nobody wants to hear anything from any consultant ever, okay? That's not a universal truth. I tell myself that to realize that most people aren't happy. Some are, but I should plan to be walking into a room where half the room doesn't want to be there, half of them is skeptical of me. And what's amazing, and I will, Jason, answer your question. Is it Jason? Yeah, we will come back to what did we do. But what we find is that these questions that are life-giving questions, or they lead to life-giving conversations, they create that heliotropic effect. So part of what we think we're onto and what we see happening is at the scale of a system, one way to shift that system is just by being conscious about the questions that are presented and the configurations of conversations that happen from those. Because you can present the right question, but without the right configuration of conversations, you can still have silos and separation and division. So by really mixing who's talking with who and how those conversations are happening, we see this heliotropic effect. Present good questions, connect people through there, just like you did a minute ago, a microcosm of that. Every time people come together and they look eye to eye at each other, it generates a subtle experience of safety, right? Of connection. Now the challenge is, if we were together for a day, if you keep going back to the same persons, you might deepen your connection, but you might actually be shrinking your inclusion. Not because you have bad intentions, but because if a facilitator is not conscious of both connection and inclusion, you miss one of those key parts of the equation. And we find that connection and inclusion is the answer to how do you get people to feel like they can be themselves and fit in, right? So, you know, we get invited into rooms where, you know, all we're really doing is presenting a question and new configurations of who's answering that together. We really believe, one of the things that Otto Scharmer at MIT teaches is that, and I'm big into mindfulness and meditation and practices that connect us to deeper places. And I agree with his suggestion that for more people, and I'll use the word spirituality. When I'm in Ohio, I can't say any of these words, but here in San Francisco, I can say exactly what I think it is. That's, you know, you all know that. You have to change the language wherever you are. But what Otto Scharmer says, his direct quote, is that spirituality is far more accessible through small group discussions than through private practices. Spirituality is far more, now he's not saying it's not accessible. It's far more accessible for more people through small group conversation than through private practices. And please, this is coming from somebody who leads groups in all types of meditation and yoga and private practices and journaling and reflecting. And my experience shows that quote to be have a lot of validity to it. I see groups of people coming into rooms who they're never going to practice yoga, they're never going to meditate, and yet we can give them one question, one conversation, and boom, in 10 minutes they come alive. And in 10 minutes they see something deeper. In just a few minutes they'll start to connect with some sense of purpose or visions that open them up, that I cannot find any other way to do it than through groups coming together. Because I think humans are built to connect. Now, I was raised without a lot of connection in my family. So I think people like me sometimes have a story that you don't need connection, you just need to get shit done. And but I'm willing to rethink that story. Because in our work, I see what happens when people who are not used to connecting get connected in a safe way. They come alive individually. Now we got to open it up to honor time. I'd love to hear 4, 5, 6 questions all at once. And then if I can synthesize and try and answer them either at once or honor some of you, I could just talk to you after, tomorrow, next week. Any way I can honor all of your curiosity. Robert?
So
One of the major questions, and also I just wanted to thank Jon for coming and taking his time out. And one question is, because there are guessing will be a lot of questions. If you guys want to stay longer, I mean, certainly we said this was going to be at noon, and anyone who wants to leave can feel free to leave. And if you have more questions, then stick around and Jon will tell us. I want you to have space to tell us. It's like, okay, can't take any more questions.
Yeah, I am flexible until 2 o'clock, whatever. So I can hang out after.
And I think what's good is to end at noon and then have time to.
That's great,
right?
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
The question that I had was, there seems to be a growing demand, and it's reflected in the demand that you're seeing from organizations like BMW and Facebook and Clark and Fairmont Santal, that even companies that are in very traditional markets are suddenly demanding a combination of purpose and connection. There just seems to be a longing for it in the community as a whole. And why do you think that is? And like, what sea change do you see happening just from your own personal experience of the demand for this work suddenly being created in the world?
Okay, I captured that question. I'd love to hear more. And then, yes, please.
I'm Brian. I work for Epic Impact. And one thing that you said really stood out to me, and that is, the earliest questions we ask affect everything else in a conversation.
Yes.
So I get on the phone with salespeople a lot to try to sell them into our programs. What are some of those questions you would say to really set the tone from the get-go?
Okay, great. Questions when selling.
Yeah.
Great. There's a lot there. Please, thank you.
Okay, I'm Kara. It's kind of a similar question. You mentioned having 5 questions that you ask in a lot of different settings, and I think I got like maybe 3 or 4 of them, but if you could just review.
It's great because that's going to help me honor Jason's question too. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, please.
We talked about why making positive change in communities is important. What if, so I work at a large company, Salesforce, 30,000 employees.
Yeah.
I'm probably, I don't even know how many levels with.
And what was your name, please?
My name's Matt.
Hi, Matt. Yes.
Hi. So the question is, how do you go about trying to make those changes outside of your org, but more, managing up, so to speak?
Yep. Great.
When I say outside of your org, I mean outside of people. What do you recommend?
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd love to hear, please.
Tenzin, and my question is, how do you organize when the organization that you work for is not structured for you to be able to organize independently or in a collective? So how can you form and work in environments that may not be rising or nourishing?
And I really enjoy how many of these questions I have no answer to. Please.
Ken, you mentioned that you've done some BMW work, soon in Germany.
Yes.
Can you give us any insight on your methodology and how it plays globally in different cultures?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, let me honor. Yes. Yes.
So that might tag off of that. As you're going into a new company, and you're trying to measure sort of the health of that company or organization, are there 3 things or something like that that you're looking at specifically to get a sense of where that company's at in your framework?
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Thanks.
If you're someone that's running an organization and this is something you'd like to steward into the organization, how would you kind of lead yourself through this process?
Yeah.
And also be like gentle with yourself as you go through the process.
It's Eric, right?
Yeah.
I'll have to cut the questions off at some point here. so I can race
Natalie?
through the answers. Yes.
Yeah, I really loved your idea of creating this shared vision and having everyone feel like a sense of belonging in that vision. But you talked a little bit about how you bring that down to a tactical level. But once you have that vision created and everybody's on board that this is what change we want to have, how do you then bring that into a more tactical stance?
You say Kelly?
Natalie.
Would it be okay if I cut it off here because there's 10 minutes and 10 years of questions? No, I mean, these are very deep and they deserve endless exploration. And I'll hang out too. So I'm humbled by these questions and the fact that you think I might have answers to some of these. Let me start with several of you that had similar questions. It started with Jason's around, like, what questions did you bring this last week? And what are the 5 questions? And how do you move a vision into actuality? Those I can join together. So I'm going to give you a real example. Because of confidentiality, I'm not going to give you what we did this week, but I'll walk you through something we've done with another client that you can, if you're willing to trust me, you're getting, very similar, very similar. It's as good as the same. So, so here's one example. So we'll use Clark. This was recent, just several weeks ago. 100 people come into a room, and here's the agenda over 2 days. Okay, so here's day 1, here's day 2, right? This is AM, PM, right? So now, just to be clear, when we go into an organization and we're doing this like rapid acceleration summit where a lot's going to happen, there's months before this summit, there's dialogue with that client around defining why we're coming together, lots of questions around who's going to be invited, how they're going to be mixed together. I mean, I'm working with them to approve every single word that's in our workbook that guides all the questions, because every word matters in every organization. So around culture, I'll come to that. Every word matters. I mean, there's one company where I could introduce Appreciative Inquiry one way, and another company that would literally say, if you say any of those words, it's going to turn everybody on. So there's a lot of prep work to make sure that everything is aligning culturally. And during that prep work where we're saying, give us real feedback, it's a big challenge to the ego as the consultant, because I have to remember it's not about me, it's about the language or the images that we're using. And so I have to get totally unattached and realize it's about what's going to serve them. And I eventually realized that most of what they're disagreeing with, not all of it, it doesn't negate the true essence of the guiding principles of what work. But once we get there, so here's, in 2 days, an example of moving a whole system through a strategic planning process. They're walking into a room with a blank canvas. They're walking out with a co-created strategic vision, and they're ready to move forward with that in practical ways. So the first question they're going to ask is a purpose question. Literally, we've already talked about this. We're gonna have them collectively have conversations around why is the work that we're doing as an organization important, and we give it a little time, more than what you had here. But I can tell you almost universally, when we present the question the right way, we're asking them, how does this not only serve you meaningfully, how does it serve the organization, but how is what we're here together to do going to serve the world in a way that would give you a sense of pride, meaning, or fulfillment? Every one of those words is an unlocking mechanism. I'll just send you the workbook from that client. Like, these are all written out. I'll just send you this stuff. Because that way you get through faster. You don't have to try and write. Is that okay? So that's the first conversation. The next conversation is what we call studying our strengths. So this would be where, let's say they're coming up with a strategic vision, and there's 100 people in the room. What we're going to do is we're going to ask them, the first question is, everybody think of a story of when we've seen ourselves at our best as an organization. We share those stories all across the room, and then in groups of 6, 7, and 8, they'll actually uncover themes or patterns amongst their answers. Students, anybody can go through this process. It doesn't require them to be trained on anything. They don't have to know how to think together. The whole thing we're orchestrating, visually showing them what to do. But they're telling stories of when they've been at their best. That's one question they're answering. They're then answering, there's 3 questions that are part of the strengths process. Question 1 is, We either call it a moment of excellence, a high point moment, a peak experience. We actually choose the labels for the process based on what the client is comfortable with. We'll rename this whole thing based on what works in their culture. But it's, the essence is stories of when we've been at our best. And the reason why stories are important is because if you just ask a team, when, and this, what I'm giving you right now is also a great plug and play, 60 to 90 minute thing. You have any newly formed team, you want them to skip the storming and norming phase and go right into crushing it. There's like 3 questions that work almost every time in almost every culture that we've been in. And it's this right here by itself. You could ask a team, when have you, and you can frame every question around the task. If a new team was coming together, you could say, what's a time where you've been a part of a newly formed team that was successful? What happened? What did others bring to that experience? What did you bring to that experience? What did the system bring to that experience? You can plug it into anything. Here it's just simply, when have we been at our best? And we look for stories. The reason why we want stories is because if we just say, what makes a great team? Or what makes us good at what we do? If we don't get a story, they're going to give a left brain analytical answer, whether or not you believe in left right brain. They're going to give an analytical linear answer. And the problem is now it's a theoretical discussion. If I ask all of you, what makes great leadership? If I ask it that way, you're probably just going to pull words out, right? That's not real. What's real is if I say, when was the time when you were led beautifully in amazing ways, where you saw beautiful leadership that was unlocked, and you can create whatever question you want. And then share those stories with each other in groups of 6, 7, 8. And then after you've shared the stories, let's uncover the themes and connection points. And in an hour, you'll then present those to each other and say, here's what we believe, see, hear, feel, and know is what it means when leadership is at its best. So when you're making that discovery versus somebody, we don't tell our clients anything. A lot of our clients, I can barely explain what their business is. I can barely explain what they do because the process just unlocks all of their own wisdom. So it's, when have we been at our best? What led to those moments? The second question would be, no matter how we change or evolve into the future, because we're all in this room talking a lot about changing into the future. Well, I think as leaders, we have to balance. There's a dance between what's new and novel and should change, but what should be nurtured and protect that got us to where we're at? What are the values that should be strengthened, protected, and built on and from? So that's a question that's very easy for people to answer. No matter how we change, because we're going to design some new shit here. No matter how we change, what are the things that are so important that we should keep them, right? So that's like part 2 of the strengths conversation. And then if there's a part 3, the part 3 would be after having those first 2 conversations of when have we been at our best and when are we at our best, we might ask them, let's co-create right now in the room based on everything that came out of those conversations. What are we going to call our guiding principles? What are we going to call our guiding strengths? What are we going to call our guiding values? Pick the label you want. It's basically, what are those things that have been and are so important to us that these words, these labels, images are going to nurture how we get to the future. So that's the strengths dialogue, and a group of almost any size, move them through that in 30 to 90 minutes. And what comes out of that is co-created shared values, which is so much more valuable than just somebody saying, here's what we value as an organization. I can't tell you how many places we go into where the leadership is willing to let us do this. And what they discover is not that what they were saying they valued is wrong, but they're discovering it wasn't complete, or it wasn't actually honoring what people really valued. And now when they co-create their own set of values, how much different is that, right? And if you want, just as an isolated exercise, you can take a team and say, now here's your next question. How are we going to hold ourselves accountable to those values? How are we going to celebrate when any of us are honoring those values, lift them up, find moments of when, it's a cycle of inquiry, right? That's a packaged conversation right there. Any group, uncover their values and figure out how they're going to keep strengthening and building those values. It's really easy to have a good conversation and nothing happens afterwards. So we have to figure out what's the right conversation to have that might hold them accountable to something happening afterwards. So that's the strengths conversation. It can be generic. When have we been at our best? When are we at our best? What are the values that are going to get us into the future? Then what we do is we take those strengths and we move them into, in the afternoon, we ask them about visions for the future. Right? I gave you an example earlier, Mike and I on our job. 5 years from now, we wake up, we see the organization we could most hope for, be proud of. What are we seeing? Right? They all share their answers, and then they come up with the most creative ways of expressing those visions together. Really creative. And then after they express those visions, we'll ask one more question. The next question that we'll ask the whole group is, now that we've seen our shared visions of the future, what are the possible opportunities that we collectively see that have the highest potential to make those visions come true? And we did it this week. We do it often where we'll ask the whole group. There could be 50 people. We'll have one conversation where everyone can put a question on the wall. How might we question? And they follow those 3 words with what's the opportunity that could create that vision. And you can have 20, 50, 100 people, and you synthesize what's the essence. It's just crowdsourcing. It's just voting up. Literally, it's basically, what do we think are the opportunities that get us to this future? We have people share them in groups of 6, 7, 8. They vote up their top 2 or 3, share it with the whole room, and then the whole room votes up the top 2 or 3. And we just did this, and you can have any group of people vote up from scratch, the opportunities that will get to that future in 30 to 60 minutes. Now we've got, it's 100 people in the room, we have 4 to 7 opportunity areas. When they walk in the room the next day, these 4 to 7 opportunity areas are spread all around the room as big design studios. Each of these opportunity areas is led with how might we, and then there's an articulation. It might be, how might we better serve our customers? These are just generic, these are just more inspiring. How might we, revolutionize our products or services? How might we innovate in our cultures? Whatever was important to them. And then the design phase, literally it could be the entire second day, where we go through a process where they brainstorm divergently around, so they get to vote with their feet. They get to go to these design areas, they get to brainstorm, and then they converge, and they prototype, and they bring to life visions of how are each of those areas actually going to come to life. And it's complicated. It's really hard to talk about it without seeing it. And at the end, they have a deployment conversation. So each of those 4 to 7 groups is now going to ask themselves some basic minimalist planning questions. What would success look like a year from now? What do we need to be doing in 6 months to be on track? Who are the key stakeholders that maybe weren't here that need to be brought into this? And are there any co-champions in our group that are going to volunteer to carry this forward? There has to be action-oriented, commitment-oriented questions. You can have a great 2-day summit or a great 90-minute session and have incredible things come out of it. But if the client, team, organization has not planned ahead of time for how they're going to commit to working with what comes out of this afterwards, the whole thing fails. So there has to be clarity before and after as to how we're going to honor and support and commit. And that's where the structure of the organization could end everything. If they're not structured, the organizations that really win in carrying it forward, they'll create new structures for these self-organized teams to keep coming back together. So that answers several questions, hopefully. Is that helpful? And let me see if I can answer, because I have 2 minutes left. Let me see if I can answer a few others if there's some commonalities here. So Matt, how do you make changes in an organization? Eric, how do you lead yourself through the process? I think if you're in an organization and you're thinking, how do I bring this kind of, shamelessly, you go through our LEAP certification. We'll teach you all this stuff. We give away all of our IP to everyone we certify. So you have all the playbooks and,
What is LEAP stand for?
Leading through experiential appreciative facilitation. But one of the things that we teach in LEAP is figure out how to start where you're at, figure out how to create small early wins, learn how to experiment in small scales, right, to generate momentum to bring it to bigger scales. And those are all kind of like 101 of trying to start anything in an organization. But the part that's easy to overlook too is how important it is that whoever wants to get this stuff to work, they have to embody the principles and the values of this way of facilitating conversations. And the principles and values that are underlying all of this are, number one is, I think, deep curiosity, right? Like if I want to bring to any person or team this approach, I have to be willing to be deeply curious myself. If I show up and say, let's ask some questions, but I already have pre-baked answers and I'm not really going to listen, the whole thing doesn't work. So there has to be an authentic curiosity, which only comes from some place of humility, right? The second guiding principle or value that makes this stuff work is we have to value connection and inclusion. I can't bring just the sales team in to design a sales process if I'm not involving maybe operations or finance or marketing, because how many of us have had conversations where the whole time we feel great and we know that the right people are not in the room. So we feel great because we kept them out. We think we were efficient because we know the answers. But if the whole ecosystem isn't represented, if there's not connection and inclusion, it just falls south. The third guiding principle would be you have to value, for this to work at any scale, the value of life-giving conversations. You have to be willing to walk into a room when everyone is saying, when everyone's talking about what's broken, what's wrong, or what's missing, our marketing is broken, our team is broken. you have to have the courage to flip the conversation. What does that mean? It means either to ask for the positive opposite, right? Our marketing's broken. What's the positive opposite? Well, hey guys, when has it worked? Or what could it look like if we were thriving, right? You have to have the courage to be willing to stand up and say that. Or flipping the question is either what's the positive opposite, or just simply asking the group, because how often do people talk about what's wrong or what they don't want? What do we want, right? So, but that only comes from valuing life-giving conversations. And the last value that we have to live deep inside for this stuff to work, and I kind of hit it indirectly, is we have to take unconditional responsibility, right? So it's really easy. I have work in a 30,000 person organization, BMW 45,000 people, Facebook 25,000. It's so easy in every one of those cases for the teams that brought us in, or the leaders or the groups, to think, we're part of a system. We can't change this whole system. But there's that Margaret Mead quote, right? Like the only thing that ever has or is needed to change anything is a small group of committed people. And I think as an individual, we have to be committed to what we really value. And that has to be an unconditional kind of responsibility for that. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that's helpful. It's really interesting.
Okay,
I've got some more thoughts for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talk about the culture one. That's interesting.
What's that?
The culture question. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So one of the first big engagements we ever led was I was hired by the UJA Federation of New York. UJA is the United Jewish. Does anybody know? Appeal. Is that what it is? Thank you. And the New York chapter happens to be maybe one of the more robust local level philanthropic charities on the planet. And we were invited to bring this group together. I'm not Jewish. My last name is Berghoff. It's a German name. We were invited to bring them together to create a shared vision for the community of the Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York. That was a fascinating experience. It's a fascinating experience. And I went into that knowing that it was going to be a very deep personal learning journey for me. And I came out of it with so much respect. And I kind of was thinking this would happen, but I had so much respect and clarity for why and what I respected about this community. And there were a lot of dynamics there that make that community very different from any other that we go into. Mike actually led a summit with 40 leaders of the Catholic Church a few weeks ago. And the question about Germany, BMW. Yeah, I mean, examples are in that culture, if we say the meeting starts at 9 o'clock, at 9 o'clock exactly, they're all in their chairs staring at me. The Germans, there is no expression that comes from them at any point. There's no expression. They're also, now, I have a limited experiences with the BMW Autonomous Driving Division, and what I eventually learned is, yes, it was very German, but it was also a pretty progressive, innovative segment, subculture. But there were some things that were really interesting learnings for me. These Germans don't take anything personally. Like things that they're able to have dialogues and conversations and disagreements, radical disagreements about deeply important things that I think in the US, myself and groups I've been with, we would have gotten so caught up in it, it would have created so much pain, we would have needed like major separation in yoga and green juice. Like, but these guys could go after each other, and then boom, it's as though there was never any tension. And I really respected that. And they were the fastest thinkers I've ever seen. I mean, they accomplish things, some groups that take us 2, 3, 4 hours, I saw in 10 to 12 minutes. Yeah, so it was amazing. And one of the things I had to honor, so the day before the event, I was up until 4:30 a.m. the 2 nights in a row before I met with them. The first night, because I was drinking with the person that brought me out there. We were there to have dinner, and it was 10 p.m. I thought I was going to go home, and he presents this special Polish bagpipe. I'm all the way there. We're going to do it every day office. But the night before the engagement, so the day before, we had lunch with somebody in Munich. So I ask an endless number of questions before I go into any group, usually. if I'm doing my job. And I asked a lot of questions, but I asked questions up till the second the event starts. So the day before we had lunch with someone who lives locally, and she said, look, for this group, you got to have this kind of data, and you got to present the data in these ways, because if you don't, they won't buy into this, and the whole thing flops. So we were up till 4:30 a.m. finding data to put into our presentation. I got 90 minutes of sleep, walk in, and I deliver all this data. They bought it, and then we went forward and they crushed it. But that's an example where different cultures require different ways of being presented information. They have a different level of expression. So it was hard work for my ego, because I'd say something and I'd think any group would be laughing at that. And here's what it means if Germans think something's really funny. Like if they think it's really funny, their neutral is their default, right? Neutral, like that's aggressively happy right there. Neutral is their default. And if I say something that is funny to them, like 2 out of 50 people in the room will go like this. And that's it. And that messes with the ego. That messes with the ego, because your ego is saying, whoa, they don't like me. They're not accepting me. They're not receiving me. And that happens every group that I go into, is realizing they all have a different level of expressiveness. It doesn't make them better, worse, smarter, right, or wrong. Personally, I loved working with the Germans. And I even said this at our QLM retreat last week, and forgive the language, but at our QLM retreat, where they'd have conversations and then we'd come back to start the meeting, I'm like, Americans talk way the fuck too much. Yeah. If we would shut up and listen and pause and be quiet, it would be incredible to see what happens for us. Because when I leave our country and I see people that in Japan, I've trained in Japan, where in the Eastern cultures, there is not this ego. And people are so reflective and so contemplative, and you see the peace that it generates. You see the groundedness. And my goal is, can I just take some part of this with me? Because while the Germans are all presenting to each other perfectly still, they're presenting and someone has a question. It could be the CEO. He's standing there like this until somebody calls. There could be 5 people standing there with their hands up like this. And they will stand there for 12 minutes waiting to be called. And they're calling, here's my question, right? And I'm back there fidgeting, right? I can't stand still. And I'm thinking, I hope I can just take a small part of what makes this culture great. And let that become a part of myself. So,
a sub question to your experiences at the Jewish group. I got some of the difference. The ultra orthodox conservative reform. Which were they orthodox? Were they conservative?
It was a combination. Yeah.
What are key learnings from a cultural standpoint?
Key learnings going into it, to ask the hard questions with the client, and get them to reveal what are the real tensions that will be existing in this room. And we've had cultural events like these, where in the middle of the collaboration, you have folks with differing opinions that there's real tension and real conflict. And so as a facilitating, I'm not a speaker. I go in, I don't talk much. I facilitate. My job is to listen to what's emerging and help move the group through a process. And as a facilitator, I have to be prepared for where might the tension be, and I have to self-regulate, right? I have to self-regulate so that in those moments, I can embody what hopefully will refract outward to the group. Because when there's tension, who do they all look to? They want to see, how am I responding? And if I don't know how to self-regulate in that moment, then I'll reflect back something that will spiral it downwards. And I've been in many environments with people from many countries where conflict is actually the norm, and if there's not conflict, I'm concerned. Conflict reveals that we're bringing together diverse perspectives. And if we don't have diverse perspectives, that's a problem. So conflict and tension is a beautiful sign. The goal is for me to embody in front of the room the ability to hold both in versus either or. Because conflict means it's either this way or it's that way. And I want to help them. Like this week, I can't share that. You know, when somebody says, hey, we have a conflict between this and this, what I will present to the group is I will say, can we ask a question that allows us to honor both and? Can we have this and this? And that can open people up to finding a third alternative, if that makes sense.
I'm going to ask that we wrap this portion here.
Great.
But I just first want to honor Jon for taking this time and sharing with all of us. And I can see in all of your stewing that everyone has different insights, and I invite everybody to share those with each other if you're sticking around. And just really quick, I'd love to give Jon a little energy. So at Epic Impact events, we do this thing where we put our hands out like this and we go, oh, we say someone's name and clap and say, you are epic. So like half of you in this room have done it, half of you have not, but we call that an O. And let's give Jon an O for his time that he's spent right now.
Oh, Jon, you are epic.
That was really good, everybody. So, Jon, does any final things that you want to share? I'll let you do so. I have a few things that might help the group. There are other resources. If you want to learn more about Appreciative Inquiry, there are books that Jon can recommend. He has LEAF certification. If you lead a team or lead a sales team, you can have a conversation with us as well. We've helped people implement these processes. And so there's ways to continue this conversation beyond right now. And Jon mentioned that there's some resources that he's happy to send out so we can. Robert has most people's emails here.
Yeah, if I don't have your emails, come see me at the end of that. And just even to know how this came about. This came about because Ben and I met in the first LEAF certification class. So the class that Jon's talking about, where he teaches how to do this level of facilitation, that's where we have met. And so we have access to a lot of the insights, the learnings, the resources. Obviously, you know, we love it and recommend it as a practice. And also, if you're looking to lead teams, we would love to help with that. So absolutely, look me up, look Ben up. We'll capture email addresses, and I'll just make myself available if you have any further questions to make sure that they get answered.
For those that want to hang out, you guys can stick around for the next hour or so. If you want to continue conversation, there's still some gluten-free donuts and quiche and all that good stuff. So feel free to polish that off. And Jon, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'll happily hang here and have a dialogue. And please, for any and all of you that get up and go, I have no idea how any of you sat still this long. I can't do it. I rarely sit in one place. So please get up and go. And if we connect in the future, that's great. I will share one simple thought in response, Robert, to your question, just as a closing thought. Companies are demanding more purpose and connection. What do we think is leading to this? It's a really big question. I certainly don't think we have the answer. I think there's a lot. I think we have our little world that we play in that's one, it's brought us into these different places. I do think there's, I believe in certain aspects of what some people call evolutionary theory. And I believe in the idea that like the human experience is one where we are constantly all somewhere deep down inside wanting to move towards that light. And there's an infinite number of ways to talk about where that's happening, how it's happening, why it's happening. But I really think there's a deep yearning. And I think more and more people are getting connected to, Dana Zohar would call it spiritual intelligence, right? Like for years we honored IQ. And then in the last 20 years, we honored EQ, emotional intelligence. And now there's an emergence, whatever label people use, of this type of intelligence that is around how do we connect to the deepest meaning, the deepest purpose, the things we value. And ultimately, it's that place where we can actually connect with whatever wants to evolve. And so I think there's some bigger force, and it's so easy to pinpoint, like, oh, moments in history. Look, everyone's over 40, or look what's happening to democracy, or look what the internet is doing. And I think all of those together are either triggering these changes in people, or they are symbols of those changes. I think it's both and. And I have way more questions than answers. That's our job. But I'm inspired that all of you sat here for this long to hear this stuff. I'm not used to it. Laura will tell you, literally, we don't do this. I've given one keynote speech in the last 2 years. It was the TED Talk, and that was too long. So it's a little awkward for me, and it's why I can't stay on track and can't keep track of time, because I'm used to facilitating. So thanks for hanging out. Yeah, so happy to hang.
John, a round of applause.
To our home audience. Yes, the home audience.
Sorry.